Yeah, thank you very much, Katharina, for your very flattering introduction, but also in particular for inviting me, organizing this lecture series and getting the funding from Labex, etc. I'm really, truly honored by this invitation, and I'm very happy to be here and have a chance to outline the background of this new project that Katharina just mentioned. It's right at the beginning. Officially, it started in January, but the main employee, Katharina Walker, is going to start working on the 1st of April. So basically what I'm going to tell you in the next 4 lectures is the conceptual background and some of the goals, no full results yet. And the basic, so let's see, is that working? So the basic question of the project and this lecture series, of course, then is, does the descriptive analysis of spoken and written language differ? And if it does, how does it differ? And I should immediately emphasize, although I'm going to speak about spoken and written very shortly as well, this is not the same question as asking whether and how spoken and written language differ, right? Rather, the question is, if there are differences between spoken and written language, how does this affect the analysis of them, right? That's it's quite obvious if you were to do the same question for phonetics versus calligraphy, typography, graphology, it would be very obvious, right? It's not the same thing what the differences are, but in that case, it would be clear that they are not the same questions. The core issue I'm being concerned with today, but in the other lectures also in various ways, is the question of the fact that grammatical description of spoken language involves a cross-medial transfer, namely a transfer from spoken to written. Yeah, that is essential. I mean, you can't really do, at least so far, you can't really do description of spoken language purely on the basis of audio. Yeah, not ever trying to write anything down and kind of making that the basis of your, what actually is happening, as most of you do, and as I do too, one does this unliked business of transcribing, and then once that's done, one forgets about the audio, etc., and works basically with the transcript. Yeah, and I do that too, or I have been doing that too, and new technology is allowing us to get back to the audio much more easily. So we are now in a better position than 30 years ago to actually really work with the audio, but it will always be necessary to have some kind of written basis for further analysis. Even if we were to approach the time, which I already had a number of projects on the idea that you can do search in the audio stream. Yes, that would be the next big barrier in actually working with audio, is that you search audio rather than transcripts. Yeah. So, but anyways, it's about transcripts then here, and just to be very clear from the beginning, it's not about phonetic transcription. Yeah, phonetic transcription is one basic issue, which I would say on the segmental level is basically resolved. Took a half a century. And it's also not really fully resolved if you read books like the one by Ladd in 2014 on representation in phonetics and phonology. On the suprasegmental level, there's still quite a lot of work to do. But the kind of transcription I'm talking about today is discourse, what people sometimes call discourse transcription. Yeah, that is the transcription of possibly extended stretches of natural speech of all kinds, narrative, conversational, etc. It's usually done with a practical orthography. There are some guidelines of how to do that, but there's no really fully agreed standard. And from my perspective, at least, we don't talk enough about it, or we don't talk about it very much. Everyone does their transcription somehow. And then we present our analysis based on them, but we never talk about how we do them. And so this is going to be the main topic of today's lecture. So if writing is unavoidable in the study of spoken language, does it really matter that we make so heavy use of the transcript? And my answer is not going to be a very easy, straightforward yes, no answer, but it will rather be, my main interest is, can we systematically delimit the kind of phenomena that really are more prone to be influenced from the real audio event in their analysis, from those kinds of analysis which really, where it doesn't really matter whether you can listen to the audio or not, where the transcript is actually enough. Yeah, that's the basic question. Okay, there will be three major steps in the presentation. The first one will be a very basic clarification on the difference between speaking and writing. Then I will talk about the variability of transcripts and how little we understand about them. And then I will come to the distinction between structure preserving and structure changing edits in transcription. The idea being, sometimes it doesn't really matter whether you put something into a transcript or not if you have the basic goal of a descriptive analysis, but in other cases, you're actually changing the basis of your analysis. That's the basic idea. There is in a certain way, it's not really a previous version of this talk. It's 6 years ago that I wrote this paper in the Festschrift kind of thing that Katharina was mentioning, which poses this problem in a slightly different way and actually emphasizes other kinds of aspects of transcription, which I'm not going to talk about at all here. But for example, there is, if you're working in very small communities, there is, for example, the issue of what actually you are doing to this community when you start having a writing practice for the language. Yeah, it changes the language ecology, and things like that are also actually part of the whole issue. But here I'm really interested in the descriptive enterprise and its empirical basis. So with regard to speaking and writing, there are two major points I want to make here. On the one hand, and that's well established for the last 40 years or 30 years, I would say, but before that, it hasn't been very clear, and it's still confused with some people. The difference between speaking and writing and spoken language and writing and written language involves two different types of differences. The one is the type of the difference in modality or in channel. So you either have an auditory vocal signal or you have a visual graphic channel or signal. And this distinction has to be kept distinct from the distinction between control, formality, involvement, distance, certain ways of how you, certain stylistic characteristic, one can say, that any kind of production of language could involve. So you can have, one way of representing this is in the German tradition, at least, a very famous paper by Peter Koch and Wolf Österreicher, where they make a difference between language of distance and language of closeness, where they basically say we have to distinguish between the channel. The channel can be graphic or it can be vocal. And on the other hand, we have to make a distinction between something which is conceptually spoken and something which is conceptually written, meaning a more formal kind of language and a less formal, more spontaneous type of language. But you can have, and that is perhaps even also clear made by work by Akinaso at the same time, you can have informal spoken, but you can have also formal spoken. Yeah, so the formality difference is in part at least independent from the channel or modality. Yeah, so this is quite important. And with regard to this formality distinction or distance distinction, I personally think that the major point is spontaneity, yeah? Whether language production is spontaneous, uncontrolled, or whether it's heavily controlled. And that, again, can be applied to both the spoken as well as written language. Yeah, you have spontaneous written language when you make a scribble on a piece of paper, just to take a note or something. And you can, of course, have a unplanned, spontaneous utterance when you are surprised or something, and then you can become more and more formal or controlled or planned. So what is important as well here is, although these two distinctions, the distinction of spontaneity, control on the one hand, and the difference between the two channels is important, and you can have formality distinctions in both channels, there is also a link between the two. And the link is that the channel determines the processing speed. So the basic production of spoken language is much faster than the production of written language. Any kind of spontaneous written language or formal written language takes minimally 3 times as long as any type of spoken language. Yeah, and conversely, in a certain way, reading is much, much faster than listening. Yeah, for listening, you can't control what you basically, the listening speed you can't control, that depends on your input. But the reading speed you can control in various ways, and reading is enormously fast. Yeah, so it's much more economical to read a paper than to come to a seminar, right? Because it takes so long in a seminar to basically make the same points. So if and so the essential, and that's very important for the following argument and also this project as a whole. The essential difference between speaking and writing is the processing difference from my point of view. Yeah, that is, there are different channels and different timing demands for written language and spoken language. That means that we can restate our question in the sense that we can say, do the differences following from the processing difference impact descriptive practices? Yeah, does it make a difference that speaking is so much faster than writing? And the answer is yes, but the question is it really relevant for analysis? Yeah, we will come back to that. But before I come to my second point with the spoken and written distinction, let me just briefly look ahead already to the final lecture, where I want to address the issue that comes up now, namely the issue of the question of whether we need 2 grammars or 1 grammar if we have a language like French, a language with a well-developed written tradition. Yeah, so you have spoken French and written French. In French linguistics, it's a very major divide. Yeah, and it's very well acknowledged that there is a major difference there, and that you may. But there's an open question of whether we assume that a French person, German person, English person who grow up in a writing and a literate culture, they basically have one basic grammar with certain modifications for input-output at the fringes, or is there 2 different grammars? Is it the same thing as saying if you speak 2 very major varieties of French, the Canadian and the standard French variety, do you have 2 different grammars there or not? Yeah, and I will. I have here 2 examples. One interesting observation I will come back in this final lecture is, if you look at the literature, or at least the literature I have seen on differences between spoken and written language in major languages, like the European national languages, it is rare that someone tells you this is a construction that really only occurs in either written or spoken. Yeah. The most constructions we are talking about, or grammars talk about, occur in both kind of language, of languaging, I should say. Yeah. Here I have two examples of something where people have said this is very characteristic of spoken language. The first example is something which is very rare in the languages of the world, as far as I can say, where you basically repeat the same part of an utterance at 2 different places without that being a split in 2 different constructions. So the first sentence is, die hat am 2. Oktober hätte sie Abitur. She has on the 2nd of October, she would have Abitur. Abitur is the final exam. Yeah, so you have this subject, she, and the modal or the word for have, or the do in this case, do the exam, appear twice. So you have two subjects and two verbs, twice the same subject and the same verb in the same construction. Yeah, it's not split prosodically or something. It's, die hat am 2. Oktober hätte sie Abitur. Yeah, this is a single construction in German with this doubling of subjects and the verb. Typically some at the beginning and one and the other. So it's said that it's kind of you start one construction, and while you are at the beginning of while you're at the construction, die hat am 2. Oktober Abitur, that would be one sentence, yeah, where you leave out die hätte sie. You decide that you actually want to say it a different way, and while you are saying 2. Oktober, you start a second construction, hätte sie Abitur. Yeah, so people talk about this as a turnaround construction, a apokoino construction in German. Something similar doesn't happen in English, but there is something which has been noted by people working on spoken English, where they say, if I have something like, I hate sitting around here because I'm in a bad mood, I want to go home. The bold part is unclear in its affiliation. Does it belong to the preceding sentence or the preceding clause or the following clause? You can make it appear with the one or the other. If you can manipulate that by the prosody, but you can also leave it open in the spoken language. It can be associated with both. Yeah, so this is similar in the way that you can basically have a construction in the middle of some other two constructions, making some kind of connection there. These are the type of things that people are discussing about constructions that are truly spoken constructions. But there's not that much that where people say this is really only in spoken language. In a certain way, it's also not surprising, because in writing, you can try to imitate spoken language. So what is typically considered to be spoken language will pop up in novels, etc., when people want to try to include spoken language there. Yeah, so they will make use of these constructions, and then you have it as a spoken, as a written language specimen. Okay, coming to the second point I wanted to make about spoken and written, that is the point that the difference in formality, planning, spontaneity is a gradual one. You can really say this is a bit more spontaneous than that. But, and unlike many people believe, there is no transition, no graduality in the channel. The signal is spoken or it's written, or it's mixed, but it's not a gradual, there is nothing like a gradual transition from one to the other. Yeah, so what you can find is what I would call cross-modal linguistic events. You can have pure spoken language and pure written language and pure signing language. I should mention here, everything I'm saying about spoken language in principle also applies to signing language. Yeah, I'm not making this distinction all the time in order, because I'm also not really well versed in that, but that should be kept in mind. Speaking and signing are on the same level here. Anyway, so you can have signing, speaking, writing events, and you can have events where the channels are mixed. Yeah, so if you read written, if someone reads something, then it's something where the input in a certain way is written, and the channel is spoken. Yeah, and similar kinds of mixed cross-modal events. And I'm making this distinction, or rather, I'm introducing this distinction in order to make clear that from what I have said right now so far, transcription is a cross-modal activity. Yeah, transcription is a form of writing based on spoken input. It belongs to the more highly controlled or formal types of writing, as it requires the transcriber to focus on linguistic form even more strongly than writing does anyways. Yeah, so if you transcribe, you are basically focusing on linguistic form and try to write that up. Yeah, you're consciously paying attention to linguistic form in order to understand what is on the recording. The processing of when you transcribe is totally different from when you are fluently conversing with someone. Then you very often don't notice anything about what they say precisely, etc. But when you are trying to transcribe something, you are really focusing on linguistic form. Okay, so much for this part. Coming now to the second part, where the main issue is that transcripts are underdetermined by the audio, by the vocal signal, and that for that reason, transcription basically is interpretation. Yeah, there is no 100% objective true if you have a recording, there is not a single true transcript. That's basically the message here. Let me start with some self reflection, etc. I noted that, funnily enough, this is 40 years after my first transcription exercise, which I did in the Philippines in 1984. And actually, I didn't do it. In the Philippines, when I did field work there, I had Tagalog friends to do the transcription. Yeah, and I'm not going to discuss or investigate here what is interesting. There are many interesting things I found out in preparing this talk about earlier practices. At that time, I never thought very much about transcripts, and I don't remember instructing them and how they do the transcription. One interesting thing is they hardly do any kind of special interpunctuation, yeah, no commas, no full stops. And they fill the page line by line. There is no major attempt in kind of making any kind of indentations. But what was interesting is, and I think that's what I mentioned, if you're here in the very first one on the right-hand side, or is it somewhere, hey, hey, hey. So they have laughter indicated, and sometimes they have pauses indicated. Later on, I basically followed this in my own transcription work, which seriously started in '88 when I was working on another group of language, where you can see that I basically also fill line by line by line without too much attention to diacritics or anything like that. Just to kind of make clear what the background is when I talk about transcription and 40 years. As I said, I started in 1984 in the Philippines. I had a longish field work in '88 and '93 in the Tomini-Toli-Toli area in Sulawesi, where I worked on 11 languages. It was a survey kind of thing, but I also recorded narratives mostly. There was a documentation project on Tomini-Toli-Toli in later times with intensive transcription. Similarly, Dobis project on Waimaa in East Timor. And since 2009, I've been involved in various documentation efforts in Papua Barat and West Papua in the Indonesian part of Papua New Guinea, working primarily on Woi, Iha, and Papuan Malay, also collecting largish corpora and doing a lot of transcription. Yeah, I would say that I have, since 2002, I probably have done 100 hours or more of transcription every year. And it's not really that I transcribe, it's basically, I should say, 100 or more of hours of working on transcripts rather than actually doing the transcription. I have had the good fortune that after my stay in Sulawesi, I hardly ever have done the transcription myself. I've always worked with native speakers who got paid for doing the transcription, and then these 100 hours I basically spent in discussing, working with them through these transcripts and translate them, etc. So it's not really transcription oneself, but working on transcripts. And actually, there's another dozen of languages I actually also have done 2 hours or more of transcription in various contexts, partially in field settings, but also in field method classes. And I've also spent quite some time in transcribing German. which I found an interesting exercise because you basically get a feeling of what the native speakers who do the transcription also experience in what they have to do. Yeah, so okay, but the main point here for today is going to see that transcription, in the way I produce them in collaboration with native speakers who do the transcript often by themselves, and then we discuss them afterwards, that transcription is variable, which I happen to have a number of interesting examples for, because it sometimes happens if you have bulky kind of recording stuff and are not so well organized, people do it twice. Yeah, so I have a transcript of one story from 2016 and another one from 2018. Yeah, it so happened that and neither the speaker nor I actually fully noticed that it was the same thing. So you get I now find this very interesting, because then you get these differences. I have copied the two elans together here, where this is a transcript of a Papuan language called Iha. This is how it sounds. The first transcript, or one transcript, is looks like Vehete, and the other one is Vehenten. And there is a difference in number, essentially. The Vehenten or Veheten, the N is optional, would be a singular form, and the Vehentep with a final P, which was not included in either of the transcripts, would be the plural form. But the interesting thing is the speaker couldn't decide, or decided differently on the two different occasions. And if you look at the spectrogram and the F0 and also at the sound wave, you can see there is something happening in the signal in the second part of the recording. Yeah, so Ina Wehe is clear. And what happens there is actually not totally clear. And if I listen to it with a headset, then I hear an N, and if I don't listen with a headset, there is no N, and similar things. Yeah, so the input here is clearly underdetermined, and the speaker obviously makes up his mind on the spot of what's happening. A similar example, or a second example of this kind of variability, is of an example which starts with a conjunction more, then you have a verb to do harat, which means born, with a stem former, and then there is an auxiliary nongon, which consists of a stem plus a fairly complex tense person suffix. Yeah, ongon, same language, iha, and the whole thing means I was born, and it sounds, whoops, it doesn't sound anything, does it? Doesn't matter, we have it here. Yeah, so the beginning of this excerpt is the same, basically. But in the second part, where the auxiliary occurs in the later analysis, the speaker at one transcription wrote ngon moge, and the other one he had completely different mbon nonge. Bon moge. And it's not quite clear to me why, but yeah, that's the kind of difference you can get, and which you basically have to discuss with the speaker, and in the end, what is the most plausible form meaning correlate that is intended here, probably. Okay. And this variability has two major sources, namely that on the one hand, the audiovisual signal is too rich, and on the other hand, that the audiovisual signal is too poor. Let me very briefly talk about the too richness. That's the fact that transcription is necessarily reductive, as Eleanor Oakes and many others have said. It is totally impossible to fully represent an audio recording in all its acoustic details in terms of some kind of writing. Yeah, so it's just not possible. And so the question when you do transcription is primarily always the question of what you leave out and what you keep in. And that's an analytic decision you make, what is important and what is not. And if we look at linguistic transcripts, then most or many people would leave out non-linguistic vocalizations, or if you don't instruct native speakers, in the case where I work with native speakers, I have a certain training with them normally and tell them what I would like to have included or not. But if they do it spontaneously, as in my older transcript from before 2000, some of them include laughs, some of them don't include laughs, some of them include hesitations, others don't. Yeah, and from what I see from my colleagues, it's about the same kind of range of differences. Disfluencies are sometimes people cut out repetitions, and other times they leave them in. Discourse particles are often let out, especially by native speakers, omitted by native speakers, because they are kind of deemed unimportant from a transcript, from a meaning point of view. Yeah, so they say, why should I write that? It's not important for the meaning. The meaning is like that. Of course, prosody is always a problem. Is it included at all, and how much of it is included? And I will come back to prosody later on. Coming to the other aspect of why transcripts are so variable, that is the aspect that the audiovisual signal is actually too poor. And that has something to do with, on the one hand, certain preferences on the side of the perceiver, where we have a difference between native listeners and non-native listeners. And there's also, the signal is also too poor because there actually is no acoustic correlate of something which speakers hear, even though it's not physically there. Yeah, this is partially the phenomenon of sound blindness, a term which was coined by Boas, who was concerned with a phenomenon which is not the major point from my major thing from my point of view, and that is he was mostly concerned with the observation that people are highly variable in their abilities to perceive non-native sounds. And he questioned the whole enterprise of writing, of describing Native American languages, from whether it was at all possible for a non-native speaker to write that up properly. Yeah, to hear the sounds properly. And that was actually a reason for Boas to work so intensively with native speakers in the transcripts. Yeah, Boas is the great hero of, for me, is the great hero of collaborative research at the very beginning of modern descriptive fieldwork. Yeah, for all the languages he worked on with more intensively, he worked with a native speaker, or often a semi-native speaker. So George Hunt, with who he worked with on the Kwakiutl language in Western Canada. I think the father was a Kwakiutl and the mother was an English woman or something. So this person could speak both languages native-like, and in that sense was really an ideal kind of collaborator in a language documentation enterprise. This term sound blindness, interestingly enough, has become of some interest in the cultural studies recently. So there are books out on sound blind on talking about hearing different voices in literature and culture, right? It's not something physiological, really. But there's also this book by two French colleagues, Camille Joseph and Isabelle Kalinowski, who are anthropologists who have worked on Boas very intensively. And they actually describe in this book quite nicely the reasoning of Boas for how he was working with native speakers in different communities. and his concern about the difficulty of perceiving different sounds. Now, sound blindness for our purposes is more not so much this native-like listening ability than on the one hand, the problem of auditory illusions, where which most of you probably know.
Ba, 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 ba.
So most of you will hear this man saying wa, 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 but he's actually saying
ba, ba, ba,
so,
ba, ba, ba.
yeah, so the audio here
ba,
is the ba,
ba,
but because
ba,
you see the lips, you
ba,
hear it as wa.
Ba, ba.
Yeah, this has become recently a favorite entertainment on TikTok and various other people, where people invent enormous ranges of kind of examples where you basically can try to hear that's racist, don't break it, stop raging, etc. Yeah, all to the same audio. I play this one.
Stop raging! Stop raging! Stop raging! Stop raging! Stop raging! Stop raging! Stop raging!
Yeah, so I mean, some are better and some are worse, but that's obviously when you get a visual input, you hear differently from what you hear when you don't get a written input or a visual input. Yeah, so when you see the lips, it changes your perception, and that has a number of positive and negative consequences. On the positive ones is that the visual input can help you with a missing input from the audio signal. So I give you one example here. The basket that was filled with fruits was not there. This is an example from Roy. So Nye Nawang is his basket. We is a relative marker. Tisoni is an applicative form for filled and fruit. So the basket that was filled with fruit, this one, it stayed. Yeah, that's what they say. And if you listen to that, it sounds like. Yeah, if you look at the audio signal, it seems to be the case that this ends on ya. But when I worked with the native speaker on it, then he said, no, also from the context, it's not that the basket is there, it's not there. There is a negative particle there. Yeah, but you don't hear it. But he hears it. He said, I hear it. Yeah, but you can't see it in the audio signal. But when I play it to you with a written input, you may start hearing it. Oops. Not sure whether you hear it, but then you can turn to the video, and I hope it's clear enough. Yeah, you can see the movement of the va at the very end. And once you see that, you're more convinced that it actually is there. Yeah, and native speakers have that. I mean, I have in Voi, it is extremely common to leave out the last syllable or to have that voiceless, etc. And native speakers are very adamant when they say there is this word there. And when you have a visual input, then you actually can confirm that. There's another phenomenon which is even more important, perhaps, for dealing with the poor audio input, and that is related to so-called fast speech phenomena, where you basically leave out in the audio stream, you are missing syllables, which supposedly are there. Yeah, I give you an example from the language called Waima'a Nekaradata. If it, that's the plane, wanted to alive, yeah, Nekaradata Naha, that's a conditional clause at the beginning. Basene Huaka Ege, it seemed that it had to fly la rihunei wakenini. It had to fly below the clouds or below the fog. Yeah, so it's about a landing plane which crashes later on in the ground. And if you listen to this audio, and I think I already do it this way, you can hear that at the beginning it's something like nekadata na base. Nekadata na base. I played.
Nikadatana basa ni wakaglari huni wakeni. Nikadatana basa ni wakaglari huni wakeni.
Yeah, so the ra is not there, the ha is not there, the r is not there, and you can look in the spectrogram, etc. There is nothing there. The speaker is adamant, and all speakers are adamant. That's what he's saying. Yeah, so this is a fast reduction phenomenon in fast speech. And in this language, Waimaa, it happens to be the case that it's very conspicuous and frequent. So there's a very frequent word laka, which I have in the corpus as lak, as lka, as ka, and as la, in very different ways of reductions. I have no idea why these differences occur, but it's very clear that they are reduced. It's similar in tetrasyllabic words hanahusu, bow, hanahus, hanhusu, nahusu, hanahusu, etc. Yeah, so and that happens in all languages in different degrees. This is a language where it happens really very, very frequently, and it is easy to get many examples. And the interesting thing about this resolution of fast speech forms is that speakers are consisting in handling them. So they never have any doubts about what the full form is. They can actually also produce them in isolation. They sometimes also give you the reduced form when you do elicitation. Yeah, so they say you can have lka or laka. That could be the word for go. And in some cases, actually, you can see how the reduced forms actually has become lexicalized. The important thing is, here is something where the audio signal is poor, but the native speaker is 100% reliable, or so it seems, in giving you the right form. Yeah, so I would not have a problem with a native speaker arguing with a native speaker about these reconstructions. Yeah, because they are consistent, and it's different from other kinds of amends we are going to talk about shortly. Yeah, this is the important example. There is an additional problem there, that some of the reduced forms actually have become new grammatical items, so that you actually, what used to be a fast speech, non-fast speech kind of alternation is now two different kind of grammatical structures. That has happened in the fusion of the article and the preposition in German. So if you have the preposition in and the article das, grammars still teach you that in, das, and ins is the same thing. You reduce the das into an s and say in das, or ins is the same thing. But if you do something like ins kino to the movies, or in das kino to the movie theater, it's clearly different meaning. The one is a meaning, a reference to a generic kind of institutional setting to go to the movies, and the other one is a reference to a specific movie theater. Yeah, so it's not really any longer a reduction of an allegorical form. So these examples, and there will be 2 or 3 more, should be enough to give you an idea that transcription actually involves interpretation, and Dagmar Jung and I have written about this 10 years ago. There's, for example, one example there in that paper, where transcribers actually had the idea that what was recorded as Dane Elodo, that's as a Basque language, people all, yeah, where the quantifier comes after the noun. In the transcription, they wanted to have it as the quantifier before the noun. Yeah, it's a very obvious change where native speakers have very clear ideas that they want to do that. But and that's my point here, is of a different quality from this Allegro resolution kind of thing. Yeah, because possibly you are here in the area of stylistic kind of choice between different constructions. It's not the claim that the one where the all comes after noun is wrong. Yeah, it's just that native speakers say, no, I think it's better to have it this way around. But it's not the case that the other one is not really possible. So, and similar things, and for reasons of time, I have to jump over them. Similar things happen when you work with native speakers on publishing collections of narratives, etc. Yeah, so if you do some work with them when they demand for the schools or something to get some written input in the local language, then you go through the transcripts and you kind of make changes for a better kind of reading material. The native speakers have, even if they are not in a literate society, they have very clear ideas what is better and what is not. Yeah, but it's not in the same way invariable and clear as the Allegro form resolution. It is choices. There are choices you can make, but it is not something which is in the same way that you could say la naliro mai here. That's a prepositional phrase in a certain way in this language is wrong, and the other one which was chosen for the written production is right. It's rather that both of them seem to be possible in this language. Yeah, and similar phenomena have been found in the discussion of speaking versus writing. There is something on this topic along the same lines in the literature on language awareness in second language learning. There's also something along the same lines in social linguistics when Labov talks about attention to speech, which all go together for me under the label of reflective uses of language, which are independent of the spoken written difference. Yeah, you can produce language in a reflective mode where you actually pay extra attention to a linguistic form. And that produces this variability of edited stuff, but also it contributes to the variability of transcripts, because in the transcription process, you actually focus on the options of expressing a certain item. So there is a dilemma arising from this state of affairs, which basically is the dilemma that on the one hand, native speakers, luckily in a certain way, can draw on structural knowledge that is not manifest in the acoustic or the physical signal. That's when they are doing this fast speech, fast form resolution thing. But the question for you when you transcribe with someone or work on transcription is, what kind of suggestions from the native speakers do you want to take on board for your transcript? Yeah, are you going to say, yeah, the native speaker is the holy person and he or she knows how the language has to sound? Or is there some kind of limit to, or can you make a distinction between where the native speaker input is really well-founded and actually shows you something which you otherwise couldn't get, and situations where we are talking about different options in a certain language, but not necessarily the wrong or the right kind? Yeah, so this leads me to postulate this distinction between what I call structure preserving changes that is happening in the resolving Allegro forms. That's part of the spoken grammar. And structure changing changes, structure changing input from native speakers, where native speakers, on reflecting what they hear, come up with ideas about alternative ways of presenting the same content. This is also very valuable, and it is also important for writing grammars later on. But the question here, my main concern here is, when I resolve a Allegro form, then I'm happy to include the full form in the transcript as part of the real thing, as it were. While if the native speakers prefer a different order of quantifier and noun, I make a note on that they say you can also return that around, but the transcript stays with what the audio signal is. Yeah, that's the basic point I want to propose here. And that if you follow me on that distinction, then there is, of course, the question arises, how do you actually decide on what is structure preserving and what is structure changing? And there are some practical things, yeah. So basically, I always try to negotiate with the native speakers that everything that is acoustically manifest should somehow occur also in the transcript. There's no omission of linguistic sounds. Yeah, but then there is always the question when, what is a linguistic sound? Yeah, and then in one language, there's an R all the time somewhere, and it doesn't have an easy function, etc. Native speakers say it's a vocalization, it's not the language, but I'm not convinced. On the other hand, sometimes it's very clear that it's a borderline vocalization, it's a cuff kind of thing or something like that. So yeah, so these are the kinds of issues when you want to make this systematic in creating your transcripts. What you basically say has to be included and what is not. Yeah, and there's also a limit on the size of what can be missing. So in these Allegro resolutions, we are talking about segments and syllables, maximally 2 syllables. There cannot be a half sentence be kind of omitted. Yeah, so and things like that. Yeah, it's a practical kind of thing. So in theoretical terms, what follows from this distinction is, of course, has repercussions for this question of when does the spoken written divide matter for descriptive analysis? And that brings me to my final part. And time is running very fast, so I try to be brief on that one. And that brings in the issue of prosody and how it affects grammatical analysis and how it doesn't. If we listen, here is an example from another language called Totoli. Bali kalibombong no gutumoko aka. So the butterflies cheated on him. They made a cheat on him. Bali kalibombong is the butterfly, then the verb make, and then the object cheat as a noun, and the thing sounds.
Bali kalibombong no gutumoko aka.
In the production, obviously, this is kind of two units, yeah. Yeah, as it's typical for spoken language, which is produced in these chunks, which people call intonation units, or I call intonation units or intonation phrases. But you can also see already perhaps what the problem here is. Is this an example of a preverbal subject? Yeah, would that count as an example for saying subjects in Toli are positioned before the verb? Is there a need to talk about intonation units here, or are most of you? Yeah, so my definition is basically the reset of pitch level defines the intonation unit for me. And here's a German example where you can see how pitch offset and onset between the short units, there are 4 short units, how the pitch offset and onset really jump very nicely, which is the main reason. There is no big pauses and no much final lengthening or anything, but it's really the pitch jump that gives you the evidence for the different intonation units.
Den Körper gelegt, die bereit standen, aus seiner Schürze heraus mühsam. Den Körper gelegt, die bereit standen, aus seiner Schürze heraus mühsam.
Yeah, so you can see there are 4 chunks, and they are really different because of the onset-offset phenomena. But there are, of course, also other supporting kinds of evidence, namely pauses, lengthening, and a number of articulatory phenomena. What is important here for us is that spoken language normally comes in these short chunks. Yeah, or they don't have to be short, but they are also of different sizes. Now, the problem with the example I started with the Kalibombang, with the butterflies, was that for those of you who are familiar with Western Austronesian, especially Philippine languages, they are very famous for various things, including being verb initial languages. And for Tagalog, for example, there is broad agreement that there are no pre-verbal subjects. If there is some kind of INP before the verb, then it is in a topic position. So if you have here, you have a Tagalog sentence, ang aswang, I do my thing. The vampire arrived. Ang aswang is logically the agent of the coming, but structurally it is in the left-hand position before the main clause, yeah, the clausal core. And in Tagalog, this is very obvious because you can have, and you usually have a topic marking kind of particle I there. It can also be prosodically chunked off, but it is very clear, and there's no discussion about the question of whether Tagalog has initial subjects or pre-verbal subjects. No one says that. Yeah, it is widely agreed that Tagalog is really truly verb initial. And that's the background why it's interesting to ask about this Tagalog, this Totoli example. Yeah. If the examples were all of this kind, and here you can see the F0 extraction, you can see there is a big jump, the offset-onset phenomena. Yeah, it's a very high offset, and it's there's a low onset again. There's a longish pause and many other things which really make it very clear that we have 2 intonation units. And if there were all examples, I think most people would agree then that this is also more a topic kind of construction than a subject construction, a pre-verbal subject construction. If you there are other examples which sound like this. There is no pause, but there is still this rise on the rec. Yeah, there is still a possible boundary tone on the third syllable of the word for track. But there's not really a pitch offset onset difference. So this already could be accepted as a prosodically coherent example of a pre-verbal subject. And actually, there are examples like this, where the subject is kamu and where it's totally integrated into the pitch, into the melody for this example. So in this case, one would probably want to say that the example with the butterflies is a topic example, and this final example is fairly clearly an example of a pre-verbal subject. And the autotrack is a question of the intermediate example is still a question of analysis, whether you want to put it in the one batch or the other. Yeah, so here, and this is where prosody is becoming relevant possibly for descriptive analysis. The distinction between a clause internal constituent and a clause external one may depend on the prosody. Yeah, so if it were the case that speakers produce subject initial constructions as fluently as this final example with the kamu, yeah, you get in this dilemma. You get in this dilemma that, and it were the case that otherwise in the real examples, there's always a big break and a rise. You can get in this dilemma of, on the one hand, getting spontaneous data where it's always set off from the verb, and there's no real good example for a subject initial construction. And on the other hand, native speakers producing it when you discuss it with them. Yeah, and that is actually also the experience I have had with some Philippine languages, where when you talk long enough with people, then they actually do subject initial constructions. But I believe that this is not proper data for the claim that they are subject initial languages. Yeah? If you want to have good examples from spontaneous speech to actually come to that conclusion. Let me very briefly end on 2 or 3 more general points. First, on the prosodic evidence in syntactic research. That depends, of course, very much on how you conceive the interrelationship of syntax and prosody. Yeah, and I have written a paper, but many others have argued that as well. I actually believe that in principle, they both are segmentation levels which are in principle independent of each other. And prosody has, in principle, an essentially negative role. That is, if a candidate structure only ever occurs with a prosodic break, it is not a morphosyntactic construction. Yeah, if all the totally examples with pre-verbal subjects always would include, were always prosodically in 2 different chunks, I would argue that they are not instances of pre-verbal subjects. Yeah, this is where prosody comes in. And prosody also comes, of course, then in the sense that intonation units, I would assume, are the basic processing units of spoken language, which have their own syntax. And that's why I believe that transcripts should be organized in intonation units. This is a big topic which I cannot go into right now. Possibly we come back to it in another time. Otherwise, the argument in full is in this paper from 2022. Summarizing the points from today, if one takes spoken language seriously, one has to conceive of transcription as a form of writing, which is necessarily reductive. One has to engage with the fact that the audiovisual signal does not always faithfully represent the form of spoken utterances, and one needs to distinguish structure preserving and structure changing amends to transcript. And a point which I really just mentioned and didn't really fully argue, one has to take the intonation unit as the basic organizational unit for spoken language with certain limitations or Einschränkungen. One word on what I'm planning to do in this project with transcripts is actually to do some really systematic experimentation by having the same transcript transcribed by multiple transcribers and have multiple transcriptions by the same transcriber. And also actually, and that's something I would recommend everyone where it's actually possible to do, is to document the transcription process. Yeah, so the work with Dagmar Jung is based on the fact that in this DOBIS project, and because of the age of the participants, it was important to actually record everything when you work on the transcription. Yeah, hardly anyone does that. It's a question of what used to be a limitation of resources. It didn't allow, I mean, when we were still working with tape recorders, it was, yeah, doing hours of recordings, just sitting there and speaking every once in a while and then being in silence for minutes again is not the way we normally record, but it's enormously interesting if you record yourself and your speakers while you're doing transcription. Next week, I will come back to variation in transcripts with the specific focus on the question of what's a word. And speakers also vary. Yeah, mehen tewen, on the one, there is two words, on the other, it's one word. Yeah, and how do we deal with that? Thank you very much indeed.
It'd be too great if I could switch on that camera there, but so anyway, maybe I can move the camera. The floor is open for discussion. Yeah, Kima.
I have a couple of questions, but I would ask first with the first example you provided with the special constructions like in German and English. So what is the difference between production disfluencies and these? And so when would you say there is production fluency? When would you say there is special construction?
Briefly repeat the question because we might have been.
You couldn't hear the in the recording. Okay, yeah. So the question is about what's the difference with these apokoino constructions from German and English, which was in the earlier part of the presentation. The question is, what's the difference between these constructions and hesitation disfluency kind of constructions? The major difference is, and that's a topic we probably gonna talk about in the third lecture. There's no evidence for what typically are disfluencies. So these sentences, when they actually occur, they are completely fluent. Yeah, there is no hesitation, no pausing, no restarting, etc. It's really the possibility to kind of amalgamate two constructions in a very fluent way.
Is there a place for production disfluencies in your perspective?
Yes. Yeah, we will talk about. There is a place for the disfluencies in the concept. We will talk about. So if someone says the, or if you cut off a word halfway through, etc., that's a disfluency.
No, because just when I'm talking myself, sometimes I notice that I have these kind of disfluencies without making so I just change so I know that it's kind of my style sometimes.
Yeah.
So, and there is no this kind of iteration or breaks. And so also related to that is there's also possible variability in transcription. So besides just the ones that you mentioned, we can also have bad quality of recording. So it's just difficult to hear because the recording quality is bad. So that to listen to it is difficult. But then also people can mumble. So I also know about this about myself that people sometimes say I mumble. I always know what I want to say, but the others don't. So.
Yeah, but I mean,
So
when you are, so this is about mumbling as.
No, I don't think myself I mumble.
Yeah.
So I'm not ambiguous myself, so what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But apparently my audio signal can sometimes.
Yeah. No. So this is about mumbling and the multiple ways of how our audio signals can be ambiguous. Yeah. So. It is very clearly the case that when you work with a speaker on transcripts, that there are, depending on the whole situation and the speaker, etc., there will be partially longish segments where the transcriber tells you no idea what's going on. It's very clear that if the audio signal is not good enough to kind of trigger what you want to say, then the transcriber can't do anything about it. But in this fast speech thing, reductions, it seems to me that they are typically high frequency. So it's not by chance that the word for go in Weimar Alaka has these multiple reductive forms, because it's very frequent, and it's also very predictable. Yeah, and this is the common Zipfian irregularities when everything the more predictable things are, the less kind of acoustic prompting you need to make clear what you're talking about. And this is the kind of reconstruction which I think native speakers legitimately can do, and that's what you actually have to make use of in order to be able to work on transcripts, because they are the constructions exist, as it were. It's not inventions. Okay.
That's very provocative talk. I wanted to know if you know of any studies that were done with illiterate speakers concerning the rate of comprehension. So I was struck by the differences between comprehending reading and speaking, and obviously that's done with people that both read and write, but are there similar studies done with people that don't read and write? Does it make any difference?
Production speed or processing speed experiments with speakers with illiterate speakers. I don't know about any of these, but I think the claim is, I'm not sure whether anyone has properly researched that, and Frank Seifert is no longer in the audience here, but there is this Dorico corpus. One basically you could actually compare 50, 60, 70 language in terms of fastness of speaking, in terms of syllable structure or segments, syllables or segments. I'm not sure whether anyone has systematically done that. And these figures, they are around in this processing literature. I mean, I'm not sure. Someone at some point has probably counted the number of syllables that on average occur in English conversation and has said 180 words, syllables per minute or something. But I'm not aware of anyone who has tested or has looked at this systematically across a larger range of languages. The hypothesis would be it should be similar. Yeah, I mean, depending on if you have a language which has highly complex syllable structures, maybe it's a bit different. I don't know.
There is a language in Africa, in Banda, which has very fast pitch rates, and where syllables are all concatenated. And so let's say a 5-syllable word would be reduced to 2. But it's a tone language, and in this language, tones actually tell you there is something missing. And, one of our colleagues, she's retired now, worked on this language, and she could make illiterate speakers speak with all the syllables. And to that, can you speak slowly, please? So it's something they are aware of, even though they never pronounce it. But the tones are indicating that there is something strange happening there.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. This is.
It's not just.
She worked on Banda, I remember she worked about it.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. But that's the kind of phenomenon which I have in mind in terms of structure preserving kind of additions that you get in transcript, which actually then only allow you to properly work on that language. Yeah, if you don't have this information that there are actually 4 more syllables, yeah, then it becomes possibly tricky to work on the language. And so that's exactly the kind of phenomenon I was referring to with these fast speech forms, and that happens in various ways in all languages. Yeah, there's also this phenomenon that native speakers have very clear ideas about missing syllables at the end is very widespread. There are often various indications that the unit is not yet at the full end, and that's part of this native-like hearing, that you basically know there's basically a syllable missing. Yeah, from the way it was pronounced. That the tones are, of course, are already very, very clear signs, as it were. Yeah, sometimes there probably are much more subtle signs for missing stuff that's actually there.
I have experience with peasant working with Roland Kissling on this language, and there was this kind of missing syllables, but there were no tonal indications. Not always. Not always tonal relics to show that there's something missing. And also, even what complicated in an instance was that there was already an orthography guide for this language. And this orthography guide didn't really make allowance for these missing syllables. So sometimes when you ask speakers to reconstitute the syllables, those who are aware of the orthography guides run into all kinds of problems because what was reconstituted not seem real.
Yeah, yeah. No, so I mean that's another example. Obviously, this I mean would be interested. Let's put it that way. For me, an interesting thing about these reductions is, as I have tried to make clear, I've worked on this, let's say, 20 languages. There's this one language where it's just, I mean, it just jumped at me within 2 weeks, and it has interested me for this one language very much so. The same thing happens also with other languages, but to a much lesser degree. Yeah, it never became a big issue in Toli, for example. There are a few reductions there, but it's not, especially of CV syllables which have the same shape. Yeah, so where this consonant and the vowels are the same, tata, etc. You get reductions and that's what I've seen in many languages. But it's interesting, and obviously in Africa you have different settings where you have that quite frequently. That's very interesting to know.
In Australia too, perhaps. Whenever I see a talk on an Australian language and people read out the examples, I don't recognize anything already there because
I haven't.
I thought it was maybe an aerial phenomenon of Australian languages because it's like jum, you know, which is genuinely. Oh, well, I dropped.
Since I spoke, one thing you mentioned is that you now do transcription of German yourself.
Yes.
And I was just wondering whether, as a native speaker, linguist, you find yourself also adjusting if you do transcriptions based on oral on text, you know, that you listen to. Do you find yourself making adjustments also, like your consultants?
Yeah.
The question is to see if native speaker intuition by linguists can have an influence on it.
Yeah. So the question is about when I do German transcription myself, to what extent I make adjustments, or I would actually say the most conspicuous thing to myself is that a considerable inconsistency with regard to pronouns. Yeah, so as English as well, German has nominative and accusative pronouns, and they are kind of grouped around the verb. But so typically people say geht but in normal everyday speech, people would say geht So it's, yeah, the is a third person masculine pronoun, and is in not too informal speech, but also up to a certain level of formality. Hardly anyone ever says you say yeah, geht And there are, for every pronoun, there are two to 4 or 5 different reductive forms. And when I transcribe, and when I'm not interested in this pronoun business, I'm totally inconsistent how sometimes I use the reduction, sometimes I write it as it should be in the standard written form, etc. And I think that's the problem what you have when you are transcribing in a literate society with literate standards. Yeah, so then there is an impact of the literate standard on transcription practices. And this is a topic which I didn't mention here, but this is also another source of this variability in transcription. and something which makes transcription pretty tricky in various ways, although one shouldn't overrate it. Yeah, so at least in the societies I've been working with, nowadays there are most people up to the age of 40 can write, and they have some kind of school education, but they are still not living in a literate society. Yeah, the writing is a practice that can be used, but it's not something that actually is part of everyday routines. So people, I mean, if in collaborative research, it's this thing that if you have a partner and you write up something for him how to operate the camera, then they're not going to read it. They look when you operate the camera, then they know how it works. Yeah, there's no idea that basically knowledge can be transmitted by reading. Yeah, that would hold for quite a number of societies. Still, they have education in a national language, and they have writing practices in the national language standard, and that kind of can interfere with transcription in transcription practices. Yeah.
The question on this, on the documentation of the transcription process, you mentioned that one way of you mentioned that Mayung recording herself while she is transcribing, but one could also imagine that one somehow archives I don't know, the preliminary transcriptions that are made by the speakers, or the different versions that one has created, and maybe document the discussions around certain things that are problematic, because I don't know, 90% are probably okay, but then there are always words that are problematic. So are you aware of people having documented and archived this process?
No. So about archiving different versions of a transcript. Not really. I mean, I've tried to start it a year or two ago to be more systematic about these chance happenings of different transcripts, and also to annotate, to make clearer, to save older and younger versions of transcripts. But yeah, I mean, this is an endless, yeah, so I mean, one has to be practical about what is feasible or not. But of course, it would be interesting what has happened, and what Ulrike Mosel, I quoted some writings by Ulrike Mosel there. What Ulrike Mosel has documented is this process of editing for publication. Yeah, so if you have a recorded a spoken narrative with a reasonably unedited transcript, so not too much into the way of writing edited transcript, then she has documented that speakers, for example, very fast become intolerant of repetition. Even though repetition is extremely frequent in spoken language, once they start developing a writing practice for their own language, they kind of find it unnecessary to repeat so tail-head linkage constructions, etc. So that seems to be something where what I call reflective mode kind of possibly universally brings people to kind of make similar decisions on what is good writing I mean, the problem in making these claims is always, at least nowadays, that you can't really say that they don't have some kind of established standard model. Yeah, so basically when people edit their own narratives for publication in forms of small booklets for the school, it is very likely that the Bible may play a role in the background for their thinking and feeling about what writing should look like, and possibly some school materials in the national language. But I would also not overrate that. Yeah, I think there seems to be ideas about what is better, what is better language, which has something to do with the fact that you actually put your reflection on the form. That's what I wanted. That was the thing about the processing difference. So when you start writing, you operate much smaller, and you start having the time to think of, isn't there a better way of phrasing it? When you speak, you don't have the time to do that. You speak, you are under heavy time pressure normally to do your deliberations.
Okay, I think that we can stop here now. So we'll meet again next week at the same time, and it will probably be in the other building, Bâtiment D, in the salle de conférence, which wasn't free today, but of course we will get the announcement again through Christophe Pater for the Labex, or otherwise contact me. Thanks for coming. Thanks also.
Thank you.